They said Elena Whitlock was nothing, a ghost haunting the edges of her own family's estate, too dangerous to acknowledge, too inconvenient to love. Cast into exile by the stepmother who stole her inheritance, she survived in a crumbling cottage while her half-sister prepared to marry a duke. But on one violent night, when that same duke arrived through the storm and mistook Elena for his bride, everything shattered. What happened next would turn society upside down, expose the cruelty of those in power, and prove that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply refusing to disappear. If you want to see how Elena's bold choice changes everything, stay until the very end, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The cottage door rattled against its hinges as another gust of wind tore through the valley. Elena Whitlock didn't flinch. She'd grown accustomed to the violence of storms, both the ones that shook the windows and the ones that lived inside her chest. She sat at the small wooden table, a single candle flickering beside an open book. The pages were worn, the binding cracked from years of reading and rereading. It was a philosophy text her father had given her when she was 12, back when he still called her "my brilliant girl" and let her sit in on his business meetings, back when she still had a home. The wind screamed again, and this time the door burst open. Rain slashed across the stone floor. Elena rose calmly, crossed the room, and forced the door shut with both hands. The wood was swollen from moisture, the latch barely functional. Everything in this place was falling apart, including some days her will to keep fighting. But not tonight. Tonight she felt sharp, focused. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the letter she'd burned in the fireplace an hour ago. Another dismissive note from her stepmother, Constance, reminding Elena that her monthly allowance would be delayed again due to unforeseen expenses. Unforeseen. As if Elena didn't know exactly where that money was going. Lavish gowns for her half-sister Margot, whose engagement to the Duke of Valkyrie had been the talk of the county for months. Elena returned to her chair and stared at the candle flame. She refused to let bitterness consume her. Bitterness was a slow poison, and she'd seen what it did to people. Her father's business partner had drunk himself to death on it. Her childhood governess had withered into cruelty because of it. No, Elena would survive differently. She would survive with discipline, with books, with the quiet, unshakable knowledge that she was still herself, still the girl who'd read Plato at 13, who'd learned 3 languages before 15, who'd been told by her father's friends that she had a mind like a steel trap. None of that mattered now, of course. Women with brilliant minds were only valuable if they had wealth, beauty, or family protection to go with them. Elena had none of those things anymore. The storm intensified. Thunder cracked so loudly the walls seemed to shudder. Elena closed her book and stood, moving toward the small window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could barely make out the lights of Whitlock Manor in the distance. Her family's grand estate, where she'd spent the first 17 years of her life. She was 23 now, 6 years of exile, 6 years of being erased. Her father had died when she was 17, his heart giving out suddenly during a winter hunting trip. Within 3 months, Constance had taken full control of the estate, citing the legal authority granted to her as the widow and mother of the only legitimate heir, Margot, who was 14 at the time. Elena, though her father's eldest child, had no legal claim. Her mother had died in childbirth, and the marriage contract between her parents had been structured in a way that left Elena vulnerable. Constance had made sure Elena understood this immediately. "You're a complication," Constance had said, sitting in the parlor that had once been Elena's sanctuary. "Your very existence threatens Margot's future. People talk. They compare. It's better for everyone if you step back." Step back had meant exile to this cottage, a place originally built for the estate's groundskeeper, now crumbling and forgotten at the edge of the property. At first, Elena had fought. She'd written letters to her father's friends, to distant relatives, even to the local magistrate. But Constance had been careful. Legally, Elena was provided for. She had shelter, a small allowance, and no grounds to claim mistreatment. Socially, Constance had spread quiet rumors that Elena was unstable, prone to jealousy, that she'd made inappropriate advances toward potential suitors meant for Margot. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter when reputation was a weapon. So Elena had stopped fighting and started surviving. She'd taught herself to live on almost nothing. She'd learned to repair her own clothes, to forage for herbs, to stretch her meager food supplies. She read everything she could find, keeping her mind sharp even as the world tried to dull her. And she waited. Not for rescue, she'd stopped believing in that years ago, but for something. Some shift in the current, some moment when her exile might finally mean freedom instead of punishment. A sound cut through the storm. Not thunder, but something else. Hoofbeats. Elena pressed closer to the window. Through the rain, she saw movement. A rider, pushing hard through the storm. The horse was enormous, dark as the night itself, and the figure on its back was cloaked and bent against the wind. Her cottage was off the main road, hidden down a narrow path that most people didn't even know existed. No one came here. Ever. The rider pulled up outside her door. Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. Instinct told her to blow out the candle, to hide, to pretend no one was home. But curiosity, that old, dangerous friend, held her in place. The rider dismounted. Even through the distortion of rain and darkness, Elena could tell he was tall, powerfully built. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether you belonged somewhere. He pounded on the door. "Open up!" The voice was deep, commanding, edged with frustration. "I know someone's in there." Elena's pulse quickened. She recognized that accent, Valkyrian, foreign, from the northern duchies where people spoke with a clipped, aristocratic precision. The Duke of Valkyrie. Lucien Valkyrie, her half-sister's intended husband. Elena's mind raced. What was he doing here? The engagement party wasn't until tomorrow night. He was supposed to arrive at Whitlock Manor in the morning, not in the middle of a storm, and certainly not at her door. He pounded again. "Please, I need shelter. My horse is near collapse." There was something raw in his voice now. Not just frustration, but genuine desperation. Elena made a decision. She crossed the room, unlatched the door, and pulled it open. The wind nearly ripped it from her hands. The man stepped inside quickly, bringing a rush of cold air and rain with him. Elena shoved the door closed behind him and turned. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, maybe less. His dark hair was plastered to his skull, rain dripping down a face that was all sharp angles and intensity. His eyes were gray, the color of winter skies, and they locked onto Elena with an almost physical force. He was soaked through, his expensive traveling cloak heavy with water. But even drenched and disheveled, he radiated power. This was a man accustomed to command. "Thank you," he said, his accent wrapping around the words like silk over steel. "I thought I'd have to sleep in a ditch." Elena found her voice. "You're far from the main road." "I know." He pushed the wet hair back from his forehead, revealing a face that would have been handsome if it weren't currently twisted with frustration. "My fool of a guide insisted he knew a shortcut. Then his horse threw him, and mine nearly followed. I've been riding blind for an hour." He looked around the cottage, taking in the sparse furniture, the single candle, the cracked walls. His expression flickered, surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "This is Whitlock property, isn't it?" he asked. "It is." "Then you must be—" He stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her with sudden intensity. "Forgive me, I should introduce myself properly. I am Lucien Valkyrie, Duke of—" "I know who you are," Elena interrupted. His eyebrows rose. "Do you?" "Everyone knows who you are, Your Grace. You're here for the engagement." Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe. "Yes, exactly." He took a step closer, and Elena was suddenly very aware of how small the cottage was. "Then you must be part of the household staff, or perhaps a companion to—" "I live here," Elena said simply. Confusion crossed his face again. "Here, in this—" He trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile the poverty of the cottage with the obvious quality of Elena's speech and bearing. Because despite 6 years of exile, despite the worn dress and the simple surroundings, Elena still carried herself like what she'd once been. A daughter of privilege, educated and refined. Lucian studied her more carefully now. "What's your name?" Elena hesitated. This was the moment to tell him the truth. to explain that she was the forgotten daughter, the exiled half-sister, the complication that Constance had hidden away. But looking into those gray eyes, feeling the weight of his attention for the first time in 6 years, attention that wasn't dismissive or cruel or pitying, she found herself unable to speak. "Are you all right?" Lucicit asked, his voice softening. "You look pale. Have I frightened you?" "No," Elena managed. "I'm just surprised. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "We." She'd said "we," as if she were still part of the family, as if she had any right to speak for them. "Yes? Well." Lucien pulled off his sodden cloak and hung it on a peg by the door. Underneath, his clothing was equally expensive. A tailored jacket, fine boots, everything made from materials that cost more than Elena's entire wardrobe. "I prefer to arrive early. Allows me to get a sense of a place before the pageantry begins." He turned back to her, and Elena saw something unexpected in his expression. Wariness. As if he were the one who needed to be careful, not her. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "I'm not looking forward to tomorrow. Arranged marriages are—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Necessary, I suppose, but not particularly romantic." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. "You've never met her, have you? Your intended?" "No, just portraits and letters. Very carefully composed letters, I'm sure." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, since you live here, what is she like?" "Lady Margot Whitlock. Is she as gentle and accomplished as her mother's letters claim?" The question hung in the air between them. This was it. The moment where Elena should correct him, explain everything, send him on to the manor house where Margot was probably asleep in her warm bed, dreaming of becoming a duchess. But Elena didn't speak, because Lucien was looking at her like she mattered, like her answer would actually influence his opinion, like she was a person worth consulting. When was the last time anyone had looked at her that way? "She's very young," Elena said finally. "Sheltered. She's been raised to be exactly what society expects, gracious, obedient, decorative." "And you?" Lucien asked. "How would you describe yourself?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not like that." "I can see that." His gaze swept over the cottage again. The books, the simple but carefully maintained space, the evidence of a mind that refused to be dulled by poverty. "You read philosophy." It wasn't a question. He'd noticed her book on the table. "Yes," Elena said. "In the original Greek?" "When I can find copies." Something ignited in his eyes. Interest, sharp and genuine. "Do you have an opinion on Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia?" Elena blinked. No one had asked her about philosophy in 6 years. No one had cared what she thought about anything. "I think," she said slowly, "that Aristotle was right that happiness isn't about pleasure, but about living according to virtue. But I also think he underestimated how much external circumstances can crush someone's ability to pursue that life." Lucien moved closer to the table, picked up her book, examined it with careful hands. "You think virtue isn't enough?" "I think virtue requires freedom," Elena said, "and freedom requires power. And power is something most people, especially women, are never given." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. She waited for him to recoil, to dismiss her as too intense, too unfeminine, too difficult. Instead, Lucien set down the book and looked at her with something that might have been wonder. "What's your name?" he asked again, softer this time. Elena's heart hammered. She should tell him. She should end this before it went any further. But the cottage was warm. The storm was raging outside. And for the first time in 6 years, someone was looking at her like she deserved to be seen. "Elena," she said. "Elena." He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "That's Greek. Light. My mother chose it. She had good taste." Lucien pulled out the other chair at the small table, sat down without asking permission, and gestured for Elena to sit across from him. "Tell me about yourself, Elena. Tell me everything." And so she did. Not the truth exactly. She didn't tell him about Constance or the exile or the years of being erased. But she told him about the books she'd read, the ideas she'd wrestled with, the questions that kept her awake at night. She told him about the loneliness of living inside her own mind, never able to share her thoughts with anyone who could understand them. And Lucien listened, not just politely, the way men sometimes pretended to listen to women while waiting for their turn to speak. He listened, he challenged her ideas, he offered his own. He quoted philosophers she'd only read secondhand and asked her opinion on concepts she'd never heard discussed aloud. Hours passed. The storm continued to rage, but inside the cottage, Elena felt something unfurling in her chest. Something she'd thought was dead. Hope. Connection. The electric thrill of being matched, intellectually and emotionally, by another human being. "You're extraordinary," Lucien said at one point, and Elena's breath caught because he said it like a fact, not a compliment. "I'm really not," she managed. "Yes, you are." His eyes held hers. "I've met scholars with fewer insights than you just shared. I've sat through dinners with so-called intellectuals who couldn't construct an argument half as compelling. Where did you study? Who taught you?" "My father," Elena said, "before he died. He must have been remarkable." "He was." She looked down at her hands. "He believed I could be anything, do anything, and then he was gone, and I realized all of that had been conditional, based on his protection. Without him, I'm just—" She trailed off, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing, but Lucien reached across the table and touched her hand, just briefly, just enough to bring her eyes back to his. "You're not just anything," he said. "You're brilliant, and brave, and honest. Those things don't disappear just because circumstances change." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You don't know me." "I know enough." He pulled back, but his gaze never wavered. "Elena, I need to tell you something. The reason I came early, the reason I was riding through that storm, I was trying to convince myself this was the right choice. Marrying someone I've never met to secure a political alliance I don't particularly care about. It's what people like you do," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People with power. You make strategic marriages." "Yes, and I've accepted that. But tonight, sitting here with you," he paused, "I keep thinking that there should be more to life than duty. That maybe Aristotle was right about eudaimonia, but only if we have the courage to pursue it." The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Elena knew she should step back. This was her half-sister's intended husband. This conversation had already gone too far, but she didn't move. "What are you saying?" she asked. Lucien stood. So did Elena, instinctively, until they were facing each other across the small table. "I'm saying," he said carefully, "that I would like very much to see you again, after tomorrow's engagement party. After I've fulfilled my obligations, I want to know if this," he gestured between them, "is real or just a product of a storm and isolation." Elena's heart was a wild thing in her chest. "You're engaged to be married." "Not yet. Not officially." His voice was low, intense. "The contracts haven't been signed. Nothing is final until the ball tomorrow night." "That's a technicality." "Perhaps, but it's the truth." He moved around the table, closing the distance between them. "Elena, I don't know what your situation is. I don't know why you're living in this cottage instead of up at the manor house. But I know that in 3 hours, you've shown me more of yourself than most people reveal in a lifetime. And The door burst open. Both of them spun toward it. A young man stood in the doorway, soaked and wild-eyed. Lucien's guide, presumably finally catching up. "Your Grace!" the man gasped. "Thank God! We thought you'd been thrown. The search party is out looking for—" He stopped, noticing Elena for the first time. His eyes widened. "It's fine, Marcus," Lucien said, his voice suddenly cool and ducal. "I found shelter. Is the horse secured?" "Yes, Your Grace, and I've located the main road. Whitlock Manor is only 20 minutes north." Lucien nodded. Then he turned back to Elena, and for just a moment she saw conflict in his eyes. A man torn between duty and desire, between what he was supposed to do and what he suddenly wanted. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said formally, as if they'd just had a polite chat instead of something that felt like it had rearranged Elena's entire world. "Of course, Your Grace." He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. "I'll see you tomorrow?" It was phrased as a question, but his eyes made it a plea. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Lucien pulled his wet cloak from the peg, swept it around his shoulders, and disappeared into the storm with his guide. The door clicked shut. Elena stood frozen in the middle of her cottage, her heart pounding, her mind racing. What had she just done? She'd spent hours talking to her half-sister's intended husband. She'd felt something, connection, attraction, something dangerous and impossible. And she'd agreed to see him again, even though tomorrow meant the engagement party where he would officially commit to marrying Margot. It was reckless, stupid, self-destructive. And Elena, who had spent 6 years being careful, being invisible, being nothing at all, suddenly found she didn't care. Because for 3 hours, she'd been alive. She moved to the window, watching Lucien's dark figure disappear into the rain. Lightning flashed, illuminating the manor house in the distance, the home she'd been exiled from, where her half-sister slept peacefully, unaware that the man she was supposed to marry had just spent the night with Elena instead. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass. Tomorrow, everything would change. The engagement would be announced. Lucien would commit to Margot. And Elena would go back to being what she'd always been, the forgotten daughter, the mistake, the ghost at the edge of her own life. Unless, the thought formed slowly, dangerously, like ice cracking beneath her feet, unless she didn't let it happen. Elena pulled back from the window. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. Thin, pale, eyes too large in a face that had learned to show nothing. She looked like someone who'd already lost. But she hadn't. Not yet. Not tonight. Tomorrow Lucien would arrive at Whitlock Manor expecting to meet his bride. He would be presented to Margot, showered with hospitality by Constance, and swept into the machinery of aristocratic marriage. But what if Elena, just for tomorrow, just for the party, refused to hide? What if she showed up at her own family's ball, the one she'd been explicitly forbidden to attend, and reminded everyone that she existed? What if she forced Lucien to see Margot and her in the same room to compare the reality with whatever conversation had passed between them tonight? It was insane. It would cause a scandal. Constance would be furious. The consequences would be severe. But Elena was so tired of being careful. She was so tired of surviving on scraps while the world moved on without her. And now, after 3 hours of being seen, being known, she couldn't go back to being invisible. Not without a fight. Elena moved away from the window and sat down at her table. The candle had burned low, the flame sputtering. She stared at it until it died, leaving her in darkness. Tomorrow she would make a choice. A dangerous, reckless, potentially ruinous choice. But it would be her choice. For the first time in 6 years, she would act instead of endure. And whatever happened next, scandal, exile, or something impossibly different, at least she would know she'd tried. At least she would know she'd refused to disappear. The storm howled outside, but Elena sat perfectly still in the darkness, a small smile playing at her lips. Let tomorrow come. She was ready. Dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt like an accusation. Elena hadn't slept. She'd sat in the darkness of her cottage, watching the storm exhaust itself, feeling the weight of the decision she'd already made settle into her bones. By the time pale light filtered through her window, she knew there was no turning back. She rose from her chair, her body stiff from hours of stillness, and moved to the small trunk at the foot of her bed. Inside were the remnants of her old life. Gowns she'd somehow managed to keep from Constance's purge, jewelry her father had given her, a few pieces of real value hidden beneath false bottoms and careful folds. Elena pulled out a dress she hadn't worn in 6 years. Deep emerald silk, the color of forest shadows, with delicate beading along the bodice. It had been made for her 18th birthday, back when her father was still alive and she'd been the acknowledged daughter of the house. The fabric felt foreign against her work-roughened hands. Strange how quickly luxury became unfamiliar. She laid it across the bed and stared at it. Wearing this dress to tonight's engagement ball was more than defiance. It was declaration of war. Constance would see it as a direct challenge. Margot would be confused, possibly hurt. The entire county elite would witness the return of the daughter who was supposed to stay disappeared. And Lucien... Elena's chest tightened. What would Lucien do when he saw her? Would he recognize her immediately? Would he understand what she was doing? Or would he think she'd been deceiving him all along? She didn't know, and that uncertainty was terrifying. But the alternative, hiding in this cottage while he married Margot, spending the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she'd been brave enough to fight, was unbearable. A knock at the door shattered her thoughts. Elena froze. No one knocked on her door. No one came here except the estate steward once a month to deliver her meager allowance, and he'd already come this week. Another knock, more insistent. Elena crossed the room and opened the door to find a young woman standing on her threshold, rain-soaked and breathless. It took Elena a moment to recognize her, Mary, one of the kitchen maids from the manor house. "Miss Elena," Mary gasped, "you have to come, quickly! It's Miss Margot." Elena's stomach dropped. What happened? She's locked herself in her room, won't come out, won't eat. She's crying something terrible and saying she can't go through with the engagement. Mary wrung her hands. Mrs. Whitlock is beside herself. She's tried everything, but Miss Margot won't listen. She keeps asking for you. For me? Elena couldn't hide her shock. Margot had been 10 years old when Elena was exiled. They'd barely spoken since. She remembers you used to help her when she had nightmares. She says you're the only one who ever really talked to her like she was a person. Mary's eyes were desperate. Please, Miss Elena, Mrs. Whitlock doesn't know I'm here. She'd skin me alive if she knew. But that poor girl is breaking apart and no one knows what to do. Elena's mind raced. This could be a trap. Constance was perfectly capable of using Margot's distress to lure Elena to the manor, then humiliating her in front of the arriving guests. But Mary's fear looked genuine, and if Margot was truly in crisis. Give me 5 minutes, Elena said. She grabbed a cloak, locked the cottage behind her, and followed Mary up the path toward the manor house. It was the first time she'd walked this route in daylight since her exile. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, and somehow more fragile. They entered through the servants' entrance. Mary led her up the back stairs, avoiding the main corridors where early arriving guests and their servants were already bustling about. The engagement ball was tonight, and the house was transforming into something magnificent. Flowers everywhere, crystal being polished, the smell of elaborate cooking drifting up from the kitchens. All of it for Margot's triumph, for the moment when she would be officially claimed by a duke. They reached Margot's door. Mary knocked softly. Miss Margot, I've brought someone to see you. Silence. Then a small, broken voice. Go away. Elena stepped forward. Margot? It's Elena. A pause. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened a crack, revealing Margot's tear-streaked face. She looked so young. Still just a girl, really, barely 20, with blonde hair that hadn't yet lost its childhood softness and blue eyes currently swollen from crying. She was beautiful in the way dolls were beautiful, perfect and fragile and fundamentally unreal. Elena? Margot's voice trembled. Is it really you? It's really me. Margot pulled the door open wider, revealing a room that looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Gowns were scattered everywhere, jewelry boxes overturned, and in the center of it all, the elaborate wedding dress that was supposed to be worn tonight hung on a mannequin like a ghost. I can't do it, Margot whispered. I can't marry him. I don't even know him. Mother keeps saying it's a great honor, that I'll be a duchess, that I'll want for nothing. But, Elena, I'm so scared. What if he's cruel? What if he... She broke off, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Elena felt something crack inside her. She'd spent 6 years resenting Margot, this sheltered, privileged girl who'd gotten everything Elena had lost. But looking at her now, Elena saw only a terrified child being sacrificed on the altar of her mother's ambition. Come here, Elena said softly. Margot collapsed into her arms, sobbing. Elena held her, stroking her hair the way she used to when Margot was small and afraid of storms. Tell me what you want, Elena said. Not what your mother wants. What do you want? I don't know, Margot choked out. I've never been allowed to want anything. Everything has always been decided for me. What I wear, what I study, who I meet. And now this, the most important decision of my life, and I don't get any say at all. You do have a say, Elena said firmly.
You can refuse. Margot pulled back, eyes wide. I can't. Mother would. Your mother can't force you to marry anyone. The law requires your consent. But the scandal, the shame. Mother says refusing would ruin our family's reputation. Elena felt anger kindle in her chest. Margot, listen to me. Your mother has built her entire life around controlling other people. She controlled your father before he died. She's controlled me by erasing me. And now she's controlling you by making you believe you don't have choices. But you do. You always have. I'm not brave like you, Margot whispered. You don't have to be brave. You just have to be honest about what you want. Margot was quiet for a long moment. Then, I want to meet him first, before tonight, before everything becomes official. I want to talk to him like a person, not like a transaction. Is that childish? No, Elena said. That's perfectly reasonable. Mother won't allow it. She says the Duke is resting before tonight's festivities and isn't to be disturbed. Elena made a decision, a reckless, dangerous decision that aligned perfectly with the one she'd already made in the dark hours before dawn. What if I arranged it? She asked. What if you could meet him privately, just the two of you, before the ball? Margot's eyes widened. How? Leave that to me. Elena squeezed her half-sister's hands. But Margot, you have to promise me something. When you meet him, be yourself. Not the perfect daughter your mother has trained you to be. Tell him the truth about what you're feeling. Can you do that? Margot nodded slowly. I think so. Good. Elena stood. Get cleaned up, rest, and don't let your mother bully you into anything before tonight. Tell her you're feeling ill and need quiet. Can you manage that much defiance? A small smile flickered across Margot's face, the first Elena had seen. I can try. Elena slipped out of the room, her mind already racing ahead. She needed to find Lucien before the ball, before he was swept up in Constance's carefully orchestrated pageantry. She needed to tell him the truth, about who she was, about Margot, about everything. And then she needed to let him make his own choice. Mary was waiting in the hallway. Did it work? Is she calmer? Yes, thank you for coming to get me. Elena paused. Mary, I need your help with something else. Do you know which rooms they've given the Duke? Mary's eyes went wide. Miss Elena, you can't. I'm not planning to compromise him. I just need to speak with him, privately, before tonight. Mary bit her lip. The East Wing, the Blue Suite. But Miss Elena, Mrs. Whitlock has people watching. If you're seen, then I'll be careful. Elena made her way through the servants' corridors, moving with the confidence of someone who'd grown up in this house and knew every hidden passage. She reached the East Wing without being spotted and paused outside the Blue Suite. Her hand was raised to knock when the door opened. Lucien stood there, halfway through shrugging into a jacket. He froze when he saw her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Elena watched understanding dawn across his face, recognition mixing with confusion, then slowly transforming into something sharper. You, he said quietly. You're Elena Whitlock, she finished. The forgotten daughter. The complication. The one who lives in the cottage because she's too dangerous to acknowledge. Lucien stared at her. Last night, you knew who I was. You knew I was here to marry my half-sister. Yes. Elena's voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering. I should have told you immediately. I meant to. But then we started talking and She stopped. There's no excuse. I deceived you. Why? His voice was hard now, ducal. What was the point? Some kind of game? No. Elena met his eyes. I just wanted one conversation. One night where someone saw me as a person instead of a problem. That's all it was supposed to be. That's all? Lucien's jaw tightened. Elena, we talked for hours. I told you things I haven't told anyone. I thought... He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. What exactly did you think would happen when I arrived here today and discovered the truth? I didn't think that far ahead, Elena admitted. I just knew I couldn't let you go without... She took a breath. I came here to tell you the truth. About me. About Margot. About all of it. I'm listening. So Elena told him. About her father's death and Constance's takeover. About the exile, the rumors, the 6 years of erasure. About Margot's fear and her mother's manipulation. She told him everything, holding nothing back. When she finished, Lucien was silent for a long time. Your half-sister is in there right now, he finally said, gesturing toward the main house, being prepared like a prize mare for auction. And her mother, your stepmother, is orchestrating this entire engagement as if it's a military campaign. Does that about sum it up? Yes. And you? You've been living in poverty at the edge of your own family's estate, completely cut off for 6 years. Yes. Lucien's expression was unreadable. Why didn't you fight back? You're clearly intelligent enough. You must have had options. A fighting requires resources, Elena said. I had none. Legally, I have no claim to my father's estate. Socially, I've been thoroughly discredited. And practically, I had nowhere to go. So I survived the only way I could, by accepting my exile and making the best of it. Until last night. Until last night, Elena agreed. What changed? Elena looked at him, really looked at him. At the sharp intelligence in his gray eyes, the strength in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself like someone who'd never had to question his own worth. You did, she said simply. You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, to be valued for my mind instead of dismissed for my existence, and I realized I couldn't go back to being invisible. Not after that. Lucien moved closer. So what are you asking me to do, Elena? Call off the engagement? Cause a massive scandal that would destroy your half-sister's reputation and throw your entire family into chaos? No, Elena said. I'm asking you to meet Margot. Really meet her. Not as a transaction or a political arrangement, but as a person. She's terrified. She doesn't want this marriage any more than you do, but she's too young and too controlled to say it out loud. And if I meet her, if I talk to her, what then? Then you make your own choice, Elena said, based on truth instead of manipulation. That's all I'm asking. Lucien studied her face. You're asking me to risk everything, my political alliances, my family's agreements, my reputation, on the chance that honesty might lead to something better than what's been arranged. Yes. That's insane. I know. It could destroy both of us. I know that too. Lucien was quiet for another long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A real smile, sharp and almost dangerous. All right, he said. Set it up. I'll meet Lady Margot before the ball, privately, and we'll see what truth actually looks like. Relief flooded through Elena. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Lucien's expression turned serious. Elena, if I do this, if I meet your sister and decide this engagement is wrong, the consequences will be severe. Your stepmother will be furious. Society will be scandalized. And you, standing in the middle of it all, will become a target. I've been a target for 6 years, Elena said. At least this time I'll be fighting back. Something flickered in Lucien's eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're extraordinary, you know that? You said that last night. I meant it then. I mean it now. He reached out, almost touching her hand, then pulled back. This is going to get complicated. It already is. Elena arranged the meeting for late afternoon in the Manor's library, a room Constance rarely entered because she considered reading a waste of time. She told Margot to come at 4 o'clock, told Lucien the same, and then disappeared back to her cottage to wait. The hours crawled by. Elena tried to read but couldn't focus. She paced. She sat. She paced again. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she made her way back to the manor house. She entered through the servants' entrance again, climbed the back stairs, and positioned herself in the small alcove near the library, where she could see without being seen. Margot arrived first, looking pale but determined. She'd changed into a simple day dress, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked younger without all the elaborate styling, more human. Lucien arrived moments later. He paused in the doorway, taking in Margot's nervous posture, her clasped hands. Lady Margot, he said quietly. Thank you for meeting me. Margot's voice was barely a whisper. Your Grace. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Lucian did something that surprised Elena. He pulled out a chair and sat down, deliberately lowering himself to a less intimidating position. Please, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sit. And please call me Lucienne. If we're going to be honest with each other, we might as well start with names. Margot sat carefully, her hands still clasped in her lap. I'm going to be direct, Lucian said. I don't want to marry someone who's afraid of me. And your sister, Elena, she told me you're terrified. Is that true? Margot's eyes widened. She looked toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then slowly she nodded. Why? Lucian asked gently. Because I don't know you, Margot whispered. Because my mother has told me my entire life that my only value is in marrying well. Because I've never been allowed to choose anything for myself, and now I'm being asked to choose forever with a stranger. Lucian was quiet for a moment. That's honest. Thank you. He leaned forward slightly. Can I be honest with you in return? Margot nodded. I don't want to marry you either, Lucian said. Margot blinked. You don't? No, I'm sure you're perfectly lovely, but I don't know you, and this arrangement was made by our families without consulting either of us about what we actually want. That doesn't seem like a good foundation for a marriage. Then why did you come? Margot asked, confusion clear in her voice. Because I thought I didn't have a choice, Lucian said. Because duty and politics and family expectations are powerful things. Because I'd resigned myself to this being my life. He paused. But then I met your sister, and she reminded me that resignation isn't the same as consent. Margot's expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been relief. Elena did that? She did. By being brave enough to tell me the truth about her own situation, about yours, about all of this. Lucian's voice softened. Margot, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly, not as your mother's daughter, not as a lady who's been trained in proper responses, just as yourself. Can you do that? I can try. Do you want to marry me? The silence that followed was absolute. Elena, hidden in her alcove, held her breath. No, Margot finally whispered. I'm sorry, but no. I don't even know what I want. But I know it's not this. Not like this. Lucian nodded slowly. Then we have a problem, because in approximately 3 hours, we're both expected to appear at a ball where our engagement will be formally announced. Your mother has invited half the county. The contracts are drawn up. Everything is arranged. I know. Margot's voice broke. And I'm too much of a coward to stop it. You're not a coward, Lucian said firmly. You're trapped. There's a difference. What do we do? Margot asked. Lucian stood and moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. We could go through with it, make everyone happy, live separate lives afterward, as many arranged couples do. You'd be a duchess. I'd fulfill my family obligations. It would be tolerable. But not good, Margot said quietly. No, not good. Lucian turned back to her. Or we could tell the truth. I could stand up at that ball tonight and announce that after meeting you, I've realized this arrangement isn't right for either of us. The scandal would be enormous. Your mother would be furious. My family would be disappointed. But we'd both be free. Margot stared at him. You would do that? Risk all that scandal? For someone you just met? Not for you, Lucian said honestly. For the principle. Because I'm tired of living a life dictated by other people's expectations. Because your sister was brave enough to stand up for truth, and I think I should be too. My sister, Margot repeated softly. Then, with more strength, Elena has been braver than all of us. For 6 years while I lived in comfort and pretended she didn't exist. Shame crossed her face. I should have fought for her. I should have demanded Mother treat her better. But I was scared and selfish, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. You were a child, Lucian said. I'm not a child anymore. Margot stood up, and for the first time, Elena saw something new in her half-sister's posture. Not confidence exactly, but determination. Your Grace, Lucienne,
If you're willing to tell the truth tonight, then so am I. Let's end this engagement, publicly, honestly, and deal with whatever comes after. Lucian smiled. You're braver than you think. I learned from my sister. They shook hands, sealing their decision. Then Margot left the library, her steps quicker and lighter than when she'd entered. Lucian remained by the window. Without turning around, he said quietly, You can come out now, Elena. I know you've been listening. Elena emerged from the alcove, heat flooding her cheeks. I'm sorry. I needed to know. If I would actually do it, Lucien finished. He turned to face her. Did you doubt me? I don't know you well enough not to doubt you, Elena said. Fair. He crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. So now you know. Tonight, at the ball, I'm going to create the scandal of the season. I'm going to reject an arranged marriage in front of everyone who matters, and your stepmother is going to blame you for all of it. I know. It's going to be brutal, Elena. She'll destroy you if she can. She's already tried, Elena said. For 6 years. I'm still standing. Lucien reached out and touched her face, just briefly, just enough to make Elena's breath catch. Why are you doing this? Really? Is it revenge? Justice? Or something else? Elena looked into those gray eyes and told him the truth. Because I'm tired of being erased. Because Margot deserves better than being sold like property. And because last night when we talked, I felt more alive than I have in 6 years. I want to fight for that feeling. Even if it destroys me. It won't destroy you, Lucien said softly, but it might change everything. Good, Elena said. Everything needs to change. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility and danger. Then Lucien stepped back. I should go prepare, he said. If I'm going to cause a scandal, I might as well look good doing it. Elena watched him leave, her heart pounding. In a few hours, the ball would begin. Constance would present Margot like a trophy. The county elite would gather to witness the engagement of the season, and then Lucien would tear it all apart. Elena made her way back to her cottage as dusk fell. She had her own preparing to do. The emerald dress was laid out on her bed, waiting. She bathed in the cold water from her well, scrubbing away 6 years of invisible poverty. She dried her hair and pinned it up in a style she remembered from her old life. Elegant, defiant. She put on the dress. It still fit perfectly, though it hung differently on her body now. She was thinner, harder, less soft than she'd been at 18. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror above her wash basin. The woman staring back was a stranger, someone who'd survived exile and come back ready to fight. As full darkness fell, Elena wrapped herself in her cloak and began the walk toward the manor house. She could see it blazing with light, hear music drifting across the grounds. Carriages were arriving, depositing elaborately dressed guests. Her stepmother's triumph, the night she'd spent years planning. Elena walked up to the servants' entrance, but instead of slipping inside, she continued around to the front. To the main doors where guests were being formally announced. A footman she didn't recognize stopped her. Your invitation, miss? I don't have one, Elena said clearly. I'm Elena Whitlock. This is my family's house. I don't need an invitation. The footman's eyes widened. He clearly recognized the name. Everyone in the household knew about the exiled daughter. I'll need to check with whoever you like, Elena said. I'm going in. She pushed past him and stepped into the entrance hall. The ballroom was beyond, already filled with people. Music played, champagne flowed, and at the center of it all, Constance held court, Margot pale and beautiful at her side. Elena took a breath, pushed back her shoulders, and walked toward the ballroom doors. This was it. The moment where everything changed or everything ended. She was ready for both. The ballroom doors swung open, and Elena stepped into a world she'd been exiled from for 6 years. The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The string quartet faltered for half a measure before recovering. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto Elena as she stood framed in the doorway, emerald silk catching the candlelight, chin raised in defiance. She heard the whispers start, a rising tide of shock and scandal. Is that... It can't be. Elena Whitlock, I thought she was... Dead, some said. Ruined, others claimed. Elena let them stare. Let them whisper. She scanned the room until she found what she was looking for. Constance, standing near the orchestra platform, her face transforming from aristocratic pleasure to something murderous in the span of a heartbeat. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Constance's smile never wavered. She was too practiced for that, but her knuckles went white around her champagne glass. She leaned toward the woman beside her, whispered something sharp, then began moving through the crowd toward Elena with the inexorable force of an advancing army. Elena stood her ground. Constance reached her in seconds, her silk gown rustling like a threat. Up close, Elena could see the fury in her stepmother's eyes, barely contained beneath a veneer of maternal concern. Elena sus, Constance said, her voice pitched low enough that only Elena could hear. What are you doing here? Attending my family's ball, Elena said calmly. You weren't invited. I don't need an invitation to my own home. Constance's smile turned razor sharp. This hasn't been your home for 6 years. You made your choice when you refused to accept your proper place. You mean when I refused to disappear completely? You're making a scene. Constance's fingers dug into Elena's arm, her grip bruising beneath the silk sleeve. Leave now, quietly, and I'll forget this happened. Stay, and I promise you'll regret it. Elena pulled her arm free. I'm staying. For a moment, she thought Constance might actually strike her. But they were surrounded by witnesses, and Constance had built her entire reputation on being the perfect widow, the devoted mother, the gracious hostess. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. Very well, Constance said, her voice dripping venom disguised as honey. But don't say I didn't warn you. She turned and glided back into the crowd, leaving Elena standing alone at the edge of the ballroom. The whispers intensified. People weren't even pretending not to stare now. Elena forced herself to move deeper into the room. Every step felt like walking through enemy territory. She recognized faces, people who'd been guests at her father's table, who'd praised her intelligence when she was young, who'd vanished the moment she became inconvenient. None of them acknowledged her now. They looked through her, past her, anywhere but directly at her. Except one person. Lucien stood near the far wall, dressed in formal black that made him look even more commanding than usual. He was surrounded by admirers, older men seeking his political favor, younger women hoping to catch his eye, but his attention was fixed on Elena. Their eyes met. He gave her the slightest nod. I see you. I haven't forgotten. Elena felt something settle in her chest. Whatever happened next, she wasn't alone in this. A gong sounded. The crowd quieted. Constance stepped onto the small platform where the orchestra sat, Margot beside her looking like a beautiful ghost in white silk. Distinguished guests, Constance began, her voice carrying across the ballroom. Thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion. Tonight, we celebrate not just the joining of two families, but the continuation of tradition, honor, and proper society. Elena's stomach clenched. This was it. The formal announcement. It is my great privilege, Constance continued, to announce the engagement of my beloved daughter, Lady Margot Whitlock, to His Grace Lucien Valcari, Duke of Valcari. Applause erupted. Margot stood frozen, her face pale, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white. Constance gestured toward Lucien. Your Grace, if you would join us? Lucien moved through the crowd. People parted for him automatically, the way they always parted for power. He climbed the platform and stood beside Margot. This was the moment where he was supposed to take her hand, where they were supposed to smile at each other while the crowd celebrated their union. Instead, Lucien turned to face the assembled guests. Thank you all for being here tonight, he said, his voice clear and carrying. I'm honored by the welcome I've received. The hospitality of the Whitlock family has been illuminating. Something in his tone made people shift uncomfortably. However, Lucien continued, I find myself in an unusual position. I came here prepared to fulfill an obligation, an arrangement made by my family and Mrs. Whitlock without consulting the two people most affected by it. He gestured to Margot. Lady Margot and myself. The room went very still. Constance's smile had frozen on her face. Your Grace, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, Lucien said firmly. I think we've had enough private arrangements and secret decisions. It's time for honesty. He turned to Margot. Lady Margot, would you like to tell these people how you actually feel about this engagement? Margot looked terrified. Her eyes darted to her mother, then to the crowd, then back to Lucien. Elena could see her trembling from across the room. Margot's voice was barely a whisper. Speak up, darling, Constance said, her voice sugary sweet but her eyes promising violence. Tell His Grace how honored you are. Margot's hands clenched into fists. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. I'm scared. The crowd gasped. I'm scared, Margot repeated, because I don't know you. Because I've been told my entire life that my only value is in making a good marriage, and now I'm being asked to commit my whole life to a stranger, because no one has asked me what I want. Margot, Constance hissed, but Margot kept talking, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. I don't want to be a duchess. I don't want to move to a foreign country. I don't want to spend my life being decorative and obedient and silent. She turned to Lucien. I'm sorry. You seem like a good person, but I don't want to marry you. The ballroom erupted. People talking over each other, shocked exclamations, the rustle of fabric as women leaned in to gossip. Constance looked like she might faint or murder someone. Margot, you don't know what you're saying. You're overwrought. She knows exactly what she's saying, Lucien interrupted. And I agree with her, which is why I'm formally withdrawing from this engagement. The chaos intensified. Constance's carefully constructed triumph was collapsing in real time. You can't do this, Constance said, her composure finally cracking. The contracts are signed. The agreements are made. You have obligations. The contracts require both parties' consent, Lucien said. Lady Margot has made clear she doesn't consent. Neither do I. The engagement is void. Constance's face went white, then red. This is unconscionable. You've humiliated my daughter in front of everyone. No, Lucien said quietly. You humiliated your daughter by treating her like property to be traded. I'm giving her the dignity of choice. Constance spun toward Margot. Get off this platform. Go to your room. We'll discuss your behavior later. But Margot didn't move. For the first time in her life, she stood her ground. No. What did you say to me? I said no. Margot's voice shook but held firm. I'm not a child anymore. I'm not going to be silent while you control my life. The entire room was watching now, riveted by the spectacle of a family destroying itself in public. Constance's eyes were wild. She looked around at the watching crowd, saw her reputation crumbling, and did what cornered predators always do. She attacked. This is her doing, Constance snarled, pointing directly at Elena. My stepdaughter. The one I generously provided for even after she proved herself unstable and manipulative. She's poisoned my daughter against me. She seduced the Duke with lies. I've done nothing of the sort, Elena said, stepping forward. Her voice carried across the silent ballroom. I told the Duke the truth, about how you've treated me, about how you're treating Margot, the truth you've spent 6 years trying to bury. You have no right to speak in this house, Constance spat. I have every right. My father built this house. This was my home before you erased me from it. Your father is dead, and he left everything to me and my daughter. You have no claim here. Perhaps not legally, Elena said, but morally? I have more claim than you ever will, because I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm not selling my family members like livestock. I'm just trying to survive with my dignity intact. The crowd murmured. Elena could feel the energy in the room shifting, people reassessing, questioning the narrative they'd been fed about the unstable daughter hidden away for her own good. Constance must have felt it too, because she made a fatal mistake. She let her mask slip completely. You want to talk about dignity? Constance's voice rose to a near shriek. You, who've been living in squalor? Who've been spreading lies about this family for years? Who seduced a duke meant for your sister out of pure jealousy? She turned to the crowd. This woman is dangerous, unbalanced. I've protected her, provided for her, and this is how she repays me, by destroying my daughter's future. You haven't protected me, Elena said, her voice deadly calm. You've imprisoned me. There's a difference. I've given you shelter when you had nowhere else to go. You exiled me to a crumbling cottage and cut off my resources whenever you felt like punishing me. I've tolerated your existence when I could have. Constance stopped, realizing too late what she'd almost said, but Elena finished the sentence for her. When you could have what? Had me declared insane? Locked away? Killed, perhaps? The gasps from the crowd were audible now. You're mad, Constance breathed. Am I? Or am I just finally saying out loud what you've done in the shadows for 6 years? Elena stepped closer to the platform. You wanted me gone because I threatened Margot's prospects, because people might compare us and find your daughter lacking, because I knew too much about my father's business, and you were afraid I'd question your management of his estate. That's a lie, is it? Then explain why you've never allowed me to see the estate accounts, why you've forbidden anyone from the house to speak to me, why you've spread rumors about my mental state to anyone who might help me. Constance looked around at the watching crowd, saw the doubt in their faces, and made her final, desperate play. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold and calculated. You want the truth? Here it is. Your father never wanted you to inherit anything. He told me before he died that you were too wild, too uncontrollable. He asked me to keep you separate from Margot, to protect her from your influence. Everything I've done has been following his wishes. The lie was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment Elena almost believed it herself. But then a voice cut through the room. That's not true. Everyone turned. An elderly man was pushing through the crowd. Lord Ashford, her father's oldest friend and business partner. Thomas never said any such thing, Lord Ashford continued, his voice shaking with anger. He loved Elena. He was grooming her to help manage the estate because he knew she had the mind for it. He told me explicitly that he wanted her to have a voice in the family's future. Constance's face went ashen. You don't know what you're talking about. I have letters, Lord Ashford said. Letters from Thomas, written weeks before his death, discussing his plans for Elena's education and her eventual role in the family business. Would you like me to produce them? The silence that followed was absolute. Constance opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. It was Margot who spoke next, her voice clear and carrying. You lied. About everything. About father's wishes. About Elena. About all of it. Margot, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Margot descended from the platform, crossed the ballroom, and stood beside Elena. My sister has been telling the truth, and you've been controlling us both with lies. The moment felt suspended in time. Two sisters, separated by years of manipulation, standing together against the woman who'd tried to erase one and imprison the other. Then Constance did something no one expected. She laughed. It was a terrible sound, high and broken and utterly devoid of humor. You think you've won? Constance said, looking between Elena and Margot. You think standing together makes you strong? You're both fools. She turned to address the crowd. Fine. You want the truth? The real truth? Elena's mother was a merchant's daughter. Common blood. Thomas married her for love and regretted it for the rest of his life. Elena has no noble lineage, no real claim to gentility. She's an embarrassment to this family. And yet she's worth 10 of you, Lucian said, stepping down from the platform to stand on Elena's other side. The crowd murmured louder now. This was unprecedented. A duke, publicly aligning himself with a disgraced daughter over an established widow. Constance stared at Lucian. You're making a grave mistake, Your Grace. Siding with her will destroy your reputation. My reputation, Lucian said coldly, is my own concern. But I'll tell you what will destroy it. Being known as the man who participated in your cruelty by marrying your daughter under false pretenses. He turned to the crowd. I came here for an arranged marriage. What I found instead was a family torn apart by greed and control. I choose not to participate in that. Lady Margot deserves better. Elena deserves better. And frankly, I deserve better than being manipulated into propping up this woman's tyranny. The ballroom erupted again. People taking sides, arguing, the social fabric of the county elite tearing itself apart in real time. Constance looked around wildly. She was losing control of the narrative, losing her grip on power. Elena could see the calculation in her eyes, the desperate search for a weapon that would turn the situation back in her favor. And then Constance found it. "Very well," Constance said, her voice suddenly calm. Too calm. "If you want to stand with Elena, Your Grace, you should know exactly who you're defending." She pulled something from her bodice, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew what that paper was. "This," Constance said, holding it up, "is a letter, written by Elena's mother shortly before she died. Would you like to know what it says?" "Don't," Elena whispered, but Constance was already reading. "My dearest Thomas, I must confess something that weighs on my soul. Our daughter—" "Stop," Elena said, louder now. "Our daughter may not be yours by blood." The world tilted. "Though she is yours in every way that matters. I was coerced, before our marriage, by a man I cannot name. I never told you because I loved you, and I knew Elena would be better off as your daughter than as his." "Stop!" Elena's voice cracked across the ballroom. But it was too late. The damage was done. Every person in that room had heard it. Elena Whitlock, brilliant, defiant Elena, wasn't even a Whitlock at all. The whispers started immediately, vicious and spreading like poison. Not his daughter. Illegitimate. No wonder she was hidden away. The scandal. Elena felt like she was drowning. The room spun. 6 years of exile she'd survived. 6 years of being erased she'd endured. But this, having the foundation of her entire identity ripped away in front of everyone, this was something else entirely. She looked at Margot, saw shock and pity in her half-sister's eyes. Not even half-sister, no relation at all. She looked at Lucien, waiting for him to step back, to distance himself from this new, deeper scandal. But Lucien didn't move. Instead, he did something that stopped Elena's spiraling thoughts completely. He stepped forward, directly in front of Constance, and said in a voice that carried to every corner of the ballroom, "I don't care." Constance blinked. "Excuse me?" "I don't care," Lucien repeated, "about bloodlines or legitimacy or any of the things you think matter. I care about character, intelligence, courage, and Elena has more of all three than anyone else in this room." He turned to Elena, and his eyes were blazing with something fierce and protective. "Your mother's letter doesn't change who you are," he said. "It doesn't change what you've survived. It doesn't change the fact that you're extraordinary." Elena couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Lucien turned back to address the stunned crowd. "I came here tonight expecting to make one announcement. I'll make a different one instead." He held out his hand to Elena. "I'd like to formally request permission to court you, if you'll have me." The ballroom exploded. People shouting, gasping. A few women actually fainting. This was beyond scandal now. This was social apocalypse. Constance looked apoplectic. "You cannot be serious." "I'm completely serious," Lucien said. "Elena, will you allow me to court you?" Elena stared at his outstretched hand. This was insane. Accepting would make her the target of every gossip in the county. It would cement her as a social pariah. It would destroy whatever chance she had of quietly rebuilding a life somewhere else. But it would also be the truth, the real truth, not the one Constance had built, or the one society expected. Elena took his hand. The crowd's reaction was deafening. Constance actually stumbled backward. Margot started laughing, a sound of pure, disbelieving joy. And Lord Ashford, bless him, started clapping. Slowly, hesitantly, a few others joined him. Not many. Most of the crowd looked horrified, scandalized, thrilled by the drama, but unwilling to condone it. But enough people clapped that it became impossible to ignore. Constance's last shred of control shattered. "Get out," she hissed at Elena. "Get out of my house. You're not welcome here. You never were." "It's not your house," Lord Ashford said quietly. He'd made his way to the front of the crowd now. "Actually, Mrs. Whitlock, there's something you should know. Thomas's will, the one you've been executing for 6 years, had a codicil, one that only became active if Elena reached the age of 23 and was still unmarried." Constance went very still. "What?" "Elena turned 23 2 months ago," Lord Ashford continued. "According to the codicil, she's entitled to half the estate's income, retroactive to her father's death.
I have the documents in my office. I was waiting for the right moment to inform you. He looked at Elena. My dear, you're not penniless. You never were. Thomas made sure of that. I'm sorry it took me so long to act, but I wanted to be certain of the legal standing before I— You knew? Elena whispered. All this time you knew I had a claim? I knew. And I've been gathering evidence of Mrs. Whitlock's mismanagement. The courts will be very interested in how she's been diverting funds meant for you. Constance looked like she might collapse. All the color had drained from her face. This is— You can't— I can, Lord Ashford said. And I will. Consider this your notice, Mrs. Whitlock. You're no longer in control of this estate. The executorship will be transferred to me pending a full audit. And if we find what I suspect we'll find, fraud, embezzlement, deliberate cruelty, there will be consequences. The crowd had gone silent again, watching the complete destruction of Constance Whitlock's power. Elena felt dizzy. In the span of 20 minutes, she'd gone from exile to scandal to— what? Heiress? Vindicated daughter? She looked at Lucien, who was still holding her hand. Did you know about this? She asked quietly. No, but I'm very glad it's true. He smiled, though it doesn't change anything. I would have asked to court you regardless. Even knowing what my mother's letter said? Especially knowing that, because it means you've survived even more than I realized, and you're still standing. Constance made one final, desperate attempt. This isn't over, she snarled. I'll fight this. I'll drag all of you through every court in the country. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. A survivor, Margot interrupted. She'd moved to stand beside Elena, her young face set with determination. You'll make sure everyone knows Elena is a survivor, someone who endured your cruelty and won anyway. I think I can live with that reputation. You ungrateful— No, Margot said firmly. I'm finally grateful for the right things, for Elena showing me what real courage looks like, for the Duke respecting my choice instead of forcing me into marriage, for Lord Ashford doing what's right even though it took him too long. I'm grateful for all of it, just not for you. Constance looked at her daughter, the daughter she'd controlled and shaped for 20 years, and saw nothing but a stranger. It broke something in her. Constance's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of her all at once. I want everyone out, she said dully. This ball is over. Get out, all of you. The crowd needed no further encouragement. They fled toward the exits, already composing the letters they'd write, the gossip they'd spread. The scandal of the decade had just unfolded before their eyes, and they couldn't wait to be the ones to share it. Within minutes, the ballroom was empty except for Elena, Lucien, Margot, Lord Ashford, and Constance. Constance looked in them all with hollow eyes. I did what I had to do, to survive, to protect what was mine. You destroyed people to protect your comfort, Elena said quietly. That's not the same thing. Constance didn't respond. She simply turned and walked out of the ballroom, her silk gown trailing behind her like a burial shroud. Elena watched her go and felt nothing. No triumph, no revenge satisfaction, just exhaustion and the strange hollow feeling of a war finally ending. Are you all right? Lucien asked softly. Elena looked at him, this man who'd stood beside her when he had every reason to run. Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. He squeezed her hand gently. For what it's worth, you were magnificent. I was terrified. Courage and terror aren't mutually exclusive. Lord Ashford cleared his throat. Elena, we need to discuss the estate business, and there are legal proceedings that will need your involvement, but those can wait until morning. For tonight, you should rest. Where? Elena asked. She couldn't go back to the cottage. Not now. Not after everything. Guest room, Margot said immediately. A proper guest room, in the family wing, where you should have been all along. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. Margot. Don't, Margot said. Don't thank me for basic decency. I should have fought for you years ago. Let me start making up for that now. The four of them left the ballroom together. The house felt different now, no longer a prison, but not quite a home either. Something in between, something still being defined. As they climbed the stairs to the family wing, Elena caught sight of herself in a hallway mirror. The woman looking back was still wearing the emerald dress, but everything else had changed. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She wasn't the exile or the complication or the ghost at the edge of her own life. She was something new.
Something still being born in the ruins of everything that had burned tonight. And watching Lucian's reflection beside hers, seeing the way he looked at her, like she was worth standing beside even when the world was falling apart, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years. Hope. Not the fragile kind that shattered at the first setback. The fierce kind that survived storms. The guest room Margot led her to was nothing like the cottage Elena had survived in for 6 years. High ceilings. Windows that actually closed properly. A bed with clean linens that smelled of lavender instead of damp and neglect. Elena stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. "It's all right," Margot said softly. "This is your home. It always was." "I don't know if I remember how to live like this," Elena admitted. Margot took her hand, an echo of the gesture Lucien had made in the ballroom, and pulled her inside. "Then we'll remember together." After Margot left, Elena sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the trembling to start, for the collapse that always came after surviving something impossible. But her hands remained steady. Her breathing stayed even. She'd expected to feel triumph, or relief, or even the savage satisfaction of revenge. Instead, she felt calm. Dangerously, impossibly calm. Because the war wasn't over. Tonight had been a battle, a spectacular, devastating battle. But Constance wouldn't surrender without fighting back with everything she had left. And Elena knew her stepmother well enough to know that a cornered predator was the most dangerous kind. Sleep didn't come. Elena lay awake watching dawn creep across the unfamiliar ceiling, thinking about her mother's letter, about the revelation that had shattered her understanding of her own identity. She wasn't Thomas Whitlock's daughter by blood. The thought should have destroyed her, should have made her feel unmoored, illegitimate in a way that went deeper than legal definitions. But it didn't, because Thomas had raised her as his daughter anyway, had loved her, educated her, seen her potential. Biology hadn't mattered to him. Why should it matter to her? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena opened the door to find Mary, the kitchen maid who'd fetched her yesterday, carrying a breakfast tray.
"Miss Elena," Mary said, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. "Lord Ashford asked me to bring this up. He said you're to eat, then meet him in the study at 9 o'clock. He's brought the estate documents." Elena took the tray. "Mary, what are people saying? In the servants' hall?" Mary hesitated, then smiled. "They're saying you won, miss. That you stood up to Mrs. Whitlock, and she couldn't break you. Cook says it's about time someone put that woman in her place. And the others? Some are scared. Mrs. Whitlock's been threatening to dismiss anyone who shows you kindness. But most of us," Mary's voice turned fierce, "most of us remember how things were when your father was alive. How you used to come down to the kitchens and help with the washing up just to be kind. How you never treated us like we were invisible. We've been waiting 6 years for this, Miss Elena." After Mary left, Elena dressed carefully in one of the simpler gowns from her old wardrobe that Margot had somehow preserved. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who existed in the space between her old life and whatever came next. The study door was open when she arrived. Lord Ashford sat behind the massive desk that had once been her father's, papers spread out before him. He looked up when Elena entered, and his expression was grave. "Sit down, my dear. We have much to discuss." Elena sat. "How bad is it? In terms of your finances? Better than you think. Worse than it should be." He pulled forward a ledger. "Your father set aside a substantial trust for you. Constance has been diverting the income for years, but the principle remains intact. You're not wealthy by aristocratic standards, but you're far from destitute." Relief flooded through her. "And the estate? That's more complicated." Lord Ashford's expression darkened. "Constance has been embezzling. Not enough to be immediately obvious, but consistent. Small amounts redirected from operating expenses, inflated costs for maintenance that was never performed, payments to fictitious creditors. Over 6 years, she's stolen nearly £20,000. Elena's breath caught. "That's criminal, yes." Lord Ashford leaned back. "I've already contacted a solicitor. We have enough evidence to bring charges. The question is whether you want to pursue them." "What happens if I do?" "Constance would likely face trial. If convicted, she could be imprisoned. At minimum, she'd be completely ruined socially.
Her access to Margot would be restricted, possibly eliminated entirely. Elena thought of Margot's frightened face at the ball, of the years her half-sister, no, not half-sister, but the girl she'd grown up with, had spent under Constance's control. What does Margot want? I haven't asked her yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Lord Ashford studied Elena carefully. But there's something else you need to know. Constance isn't going quietly. She's already started spreading a counter-narrative. What kind of narrative? That you seduced the Duke specifically to destroy Margot's engagement. That you've been plotting revenge for years. That your father's codicil is fraudulent, forged by me, in fact, because I was secretly in love with your mother and want to honor her memory by elevating you. Elena almost laughed. That's ridiculous. Of course it is, but it's also believable enough to create doubt. Constance is very good at weaponizing society's worst instincts. Lord Ashford's voice turned grim. She's also hinting that your mother's letter proves you have no legitimate claim to the Whitlock name, and therefore no claim to your father's estate regardless of the codicil. The calm Elena had felt earlier cracked slightly. Can she do that? Legally? No, the codicil explicitly names you as beneficiary, regardless of parentage. But she can make the process expensive and drawn out, and she can use the scandal to isolate you socially while the legal battle plays out. So even winning means losing. Not necessarily. Lord Ashford pulled out another document. There's a third option, a settlement. Constance leaves quietly, surrenders control of the estate to appointed trustees, returns what she's stolen, and in exchange we don't press charges. She gets to preserve some dignity, and you get your inheritance without years of legal warfare. And Margot? Would be free of her mother's control, but spared the scandal of watching her tried for embezzlement. Elena stared at the papers spread across the desk. 6 years ago, she would have chosen mercy without hesitation, would have taken the settlement, avoided the fight, tried to rebuild quietly. But 6 years of exile had taught her something Constance hadn't counted on. Mercy without accountability wasn't kindness. It was weakness. No, Elena said. Lord Ashford raised his eyebrows. No to the settlement? No to protecting Constance from the consequences of her actions. She didn't just steal money, she destroyed my life. She was willing to destroy Margot's life. She needs to face real consequences, not just financial inconvenience. Elena, I admire your courage, but think carefully. A trial will be brutal. Everything will be examined. Your mother's history, your father's business dealings, every piece of family history you'd rather keep private. Are you prepared for that? Elena thought about the ballroom last night, about standing in front of 200 people and having her legitimacy questioned, her identity dismantled, her entire existence treated as a scandal. She'd survived that. She could survive worse. I'm prepared, she said, but I want to talk to Margot first. This affects her too. They found Margot in the morning room, staring out the window at the gardens. She looked fragile in the morning light, younger than her 20 years. Margot, Elena said softly, we need to discuss your mother. Margot turned. Her eyes were red but dry. You're going to charge her with embezzlement. I'm considering it, but I wanted to know how you felt about— Do it, Margot interrupted. Charge her. Make her face what she's done. Elena exchanged a glance with Lord Ashford. Margot, if we do this, there will be a trial. Your mother could go to prison. The scandal will be enormous. Good. Margot's voice was hard in a way Elena had never heard before. Let there be a scandal. Let everyone know what she did to you, to both of us. I'm tired of protecting her reputation while she destroys everyone around her. You might be called to testify, Lord Ashford warned, against your own mother. She stopped being my mother the moment I learned the truth about how she treated Elena. Margot crossed the room and took Elena's hands. I spent 20 years being afraid of disappointing her. I'm done being afraid. If testifying helps hold her accountable, then I'll do it. Elena felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Elena, you've been fighting alone for 6 years. Let me fight beside you now, please. The study door burst open. A footman stood there, breathless. Miss Elena, Lord Ashford, there's a crowd gathering at the front gates. They're demanding to speak with Miss Elena. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of crowd? Angry, miss. They're carrying signs, saying terrible things. Elena moved to the window. Below, she could see them, at least 50 people, maybe more. County residents, tenants from the estate, townspeople from the village. Some carried hastily made signs with words Elena could barely make out from this distance, but she could guess what they said. Constance's counter-narrative was working faster than anticipated.
I need to see what they want, Elena said. Absolutely not, Lord Ashford said firmly. An angry mob is dangerous, especially one that's been fed lies. If I hide, it confirms everything Constance is saying about me, that I'm manipulative, cowardly, guilty. Elena straightened her shoulders. I'm going down there. Then I'm coming with you, Margot said. As am I, said a new voice from the doorway. They all turned. Lucien stood there, dressed for riding, his expression thunderous. How did you... Elena started. I stayed at the inn in the village last night, came back this morning to check on you, and found this. He gestured toward the window. You're not facing them alone. Your Grace, this isn't your fight, Lord Ashford began. It became my fight the moment I asked to court her. Lucian's voice brooked no argument. Where Elena goes, I go. That's the end of it. Elena looked at the three of them. Lord Ashford with his legal documents and cautious wisdom, Margot with her newfound courage, Lucien with his absolute certainty. An unlikely army, but hers. All right, she said. Let's go face them. They descended the main stairs together. The front doors were already open, revealing the crowd beyond. As Elena stepped out onto the portico, a roar went up. Not a welcoming roar. Elena raised her chin and looked at the faces before her. She recognized some of them. Shopkeepers from the village, tenant farmers, people who'd once worked for her father. They looked angry, confused, betrayed. You wanted to speak with me, Elena called out, her voice carrying across the crowd. I'm listening. A woman near the front pushed forward. Elena recognized her, Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the village bakery. Is it true what Mrs. Whitlock says, that you seduced the Duke to ruin your sister's engagement? No, Elena said simply. It's not true. Then why did he reject Lady Margot in front of everyone? Someone else shouted. Because I asked him to, Margot said, stepping forward beside Elena. I told His Grace I didn't want to marry him. He respected my choice. That's all that happened. But Mrs. Whitlock says, Mrs. Fletcher started. Mrs. Whitlock, Lord Ashford interrupted, his voice booming with authority, has been lying to all of you for 6 years about Elena, about the estate finances, about everything. The crowd murmured uncertainly. I have proof, Lord Ashford continued, documented proof that Mrs. Whitlock has been embezzling from this estate, stealing from the income that should have gone to Elena, diverting funds that should have been used for tenant improvements and village infrastructure. The legal proceedings begin next week. The mood of the crowd shifted, confusion replacing some of the anger. Why should we believe you, a man shouted. You could be lying to protect her. Then examine the evidence yourselves, Elena said. Lord Ashford will make the financial records available to anyone who wants to see them. Every ledger, every receipt, every discrepancy. We're not hiding anything. But you're not even a real Whitlock, someone yelled. Your own mother's letter said, My mother's letter said I was raised as Thomas Whitlock's daughter because he chose to be my father despite the circumstances of my birth, Elena said, her voice steady. He educated me. He loved me. He left provisions for me in his will. Blood doesn't determine family, choice does. And he chose me, just as he chose all of you when he built fair housing for his tenants and established decent wages for his workers. She paused, scanning the crowd. How many of you remember what life was like when my father was alive, when repairs were made promptly, when rents were fair, when the estate actually invested in this community? Heads nodded. Reluctant agreement rippled through the crowd. And how has it been these past 6 years? Elena pressed. Under Mrs. Whitlock's management? Mrs. Fletcher spoke up, her voice quieter now. The mill roof still leaks, has for 3 years. We keep asking for repairs, but Mrs. Whitlock says there's no money. Because she's been stealing it, Lord Ashford said bluntly.
The funds allocated for village maintenance have been diverted. I have the records to prove it. Show us, someone demanded. I will, this afternoon, in the village square. Bring witnesses. Bring anyone who wants to see the truth. Lord Ashford's voice rang with conviction. But right now, I need you all to ask yourselves something. Who benefits from you believing lies about Elena? Who profits from keeping you angry at the wrong person? The crowd was quieter now, thoughtful. An older man Elena recognized as one of her father's longest-serving tenants pushed to the front. Miss Elena, you really didn't seduce the Duke? No, Mr. Hendricks. I met His Grace by accident during the storm. We talked, that's all. He made his own decision about the engagement based on what he thought was right. And you're planning to charge Mrs. Whitlock with crimes? I am, because she deserves to face justice for what she's done. Not just to me, but to all of you. Every pound she stole could have fixed roofs, improved roads, helped families. Mr. Hendricks studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled off his cap and bowed. Your father would be proud of you, Miss Elena, standing up like this. The simple gesture cracked something open in Elena's chest. Thank you, she whispered. Other people in the crowd began to lower their signs. Not all of them. Some still looked suspicious, angry, but enough that the mob energy dissipated, transforming into something more uncertain. Give us proof, Mrs. Fletcher said. Real proof, not just words. Show us the records like you promised. Let us see for ourselves. And then, she paused. Then maybe we can talk about whose side we're on. That's fair, Elena said. The records will be available this afternoon. Anyone who wants to examine them is welcome. The crowd began to break apart, people drifting away in small groups, arguing among themselves. Not a victory exactly, but not a defeat either. Something in between. As the last of them dispersed, Elena felt her knees weaken. Lucien caught her elbow. Steady, he murmured. That was terrifying, Elena admitted. You were magnificent. I was improvising wildly. The best kind of magnificent. He smiled at her, and Elena felt warmth spread through her chest despite the lingering fear. They went back inside to find Constance standing in the entrance hall. She must have been watching from somewhere hidden, seeing her influence over the crowd crumble. She looked smaller than Elena had ever seen her. Diminished. You think you've won, Constance said, her voice hollow. Turning the villagers against me, preparing to drag me through the courts, playing the victim. I'm not playing anything, Elena said quietly. I'm just telling the truth. The truth is subjective. No, the truth is documented, in ledgers and letters and legal records, and it's going to destroy you. Constance's face twisted. I did what I had to do, to survive, to protect my daughter's future. You did what you wanted to do, Margot said, stepping forward, to protect your own comfort, your own power. You never cared about my future, just about controlling it. Margot, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You used me. The same way you tried to erase Elena. The same way you've manipulated everyone around you for years. Margot's voice shook but held firm. I'm testifying against you at the trial. I'm going to tell everyone exactly what you are. For a moment, Elena thought Constance might actually break down, might show some vulnerability, some regret, but instead her expression hardened into something cold and final. Then I have nothing left to lose, Constance said, and that makes me very dangerous. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Was that a threat? Margot asked quietly. Yes, Lucien said. We need to be careful. A cornered animal is unpredictable. Lord Ashford nodded grimly. I'll hire security, for all of you, and I'll expedite the legal proceedings. The faster we get this to trial, the less time Constance has to cause more damage. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of legal consultations and preparations. True to his word, Lord Ashford set up a public viewing of the estate records in the village square that afternoon. Elena, Lucien, and Margot attended, watching as villagers pored over the evidence of Constance's embezzlement. The mood shifted gradually. Anger at Elena transformed into anger at Constance. People who'd been ready to run Elena out of the county that morning were asking by afternoon how they could help with the case. By evening, when they returned to the manor house, Elena felt the strange, disorienting sensation of the tide finally turning in her favor. I keep expecting something terrible to happen, she admitted to Lucien as they walked through the gardens. Margot had gone to rest, and Lord Ashford was still in the village dealing with legal matters. Something terrible already happened, Lucien pointed out. Last night, and you survived it. Barely. Survival counts regardless of the margin. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. All right. Do you actually want me to court you, or did you only accept last night because you were caught up in the moment? Elena looked at him, really looked at him. At the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the strength in how he held himself, the way he'd stood beside her when he had every reason to run. I want you to court me, she said, but I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. I'm not going to be an easy duchess, if that's where this leads. I'm not going to be decorative or obedient or silent. I have opinions about everything, and I'm going to share them. I'm going to want a real partnership, not a political arrangement. Lucien smiled, a genuine, delighted smile. Good. I don't want an easy duchess. I want someone who'll challenge me, someone who sees the world the way you do. The world looks pretty brutal from where I'm standing. Yes, but you're still standing. That's what matters. He reached out and touched her face gently. Elena, I'm not asking you to be anyone other than who you are. I'm asking for the chance to know that person better, to see if what we found in that storm was real or just shelter from the chaos. And if it was just shelter, then we'll part as friends who helped each other through a difficult time. But I don't think it was. Do you? Elena thought about their conversation in the cottage, about the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, about how he'd defended her in front of everyone even after learning the truth about her deception. No, she said, I don't think it was shelter. I think it was... She paused, searching for words. A glimpse of what life could be. If I'm brave enough to reach for it, then reach, Lucien said softly. I'll catch you. The moment hung between them, full of possibility and promise. Then Lucien stepped back, maintaining proper distance, and offered her his arm. Come on, we should go inside before someone starts new rumors about improper behavior in the gardens. They walked back to the house together as twilight fell. Through the windows, Elena could see servants lighting candles, preparing for evening. The manor looked warm and welcoming in a way it hadn't for 6 years. Inside, they found Margot in the drawing room with Lord Ashford, who'd returned from the village with news. The magistrate has agreed to fast-track the case, Lord Ashford announced. We'll have a hearing within 2 weeks to review the evidence. If it's as clear-cut as I believe, Constance will be formally charged immediately after. 2 weeks, Elena repeated. That's not much time to prepare. It's not much time for Constance to mount a defense either, or to flee. Lord Ashford's expression was grim. I've already notified the authorities to watch her movements. She's not to leave the county. Where is she now? Margot asked. Still in the manor house, technically, but she's confined herself to the west wing, won't come out, won't speak to anyone. The servants say she's been burning papers in her room. Destroying evidence? Lucien asked sharply. Possibly, but I've already secured copies of everything important. Whatever she's burning, it won't save her. Elena felt a chill. Constance burning her past, trying to erase what couldn't be hidden anymore. It felt like watching someone self-destruct in slow motion. We need to be vigilant, Lord Ashford continued. Constance is desperate. Desperate people make dangerous choices. I want security posted at all the entrances. No one goes anywhere alone. Understood? They all nodded. That night, Elena lay in her guest room, now her room, she supposed, and stared at the ceiling. So much had changed in 48 hours. She'd gone from exile to vindication, from erasure to visibility, from isolation to having people who actually stood beside her. It felt fragile, like something that could shatter if she breathed wrong. But it also felt real. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, Elena called. Margot slipped inside, wrapped in a dressing gown. Can't sleep either? No. Margot sat on the edge of Elena's bed. I keep thinking about what she said, about having nothing left to lose. I know. Elena, what if she tries to hurt you, really hurt you, I mean, not just socially or legally, but... Margot's voice dropped to a whisper.
What if she tries to kill you? The thought had occurred to Elena too, but saying it out loud made it more real. Lord Ashford has security, Elena said. We'll be careful. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Elena sat up and took Margot's hand. But I'm not going to live in fear, not anymore. If Constance tries something, we'll deal with it, together. Margot nodded slowly. Together. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Margot asked quietly, What was it like, those 6 years in the cottage? Elena considered lying, making it sound less brutal than it was. But Margot deserved the truth. Lonely, Elena said, and cold.
And some days I wasn't sure why I kept surviving when it would have been easier to just stop. But I had books, and I had the memory of who I'd been before exile, and I had... She paused. I had anger at your mother, at the unfairness of it all, and that anger kept me alive when nothing else did. I'm sorry, Margot whispered. I should have. You were a child. You couldn't have stopped her. I could have tried. I could have asked about you, demanded to see you, something. You're trying now. That's what matters. Margot hugged her suddenly, fiercely. I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell everyone what she did to you, and I'm not going to let her make me afraid anymore. Elena held her tight, this girl who'd been raised as an enemy, but who'd become an ally when it mattered most. After Margot left, Elena finally slept. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't dream of exile or erasure or endless survival. She dreamed of possibility. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Elena was having breakfast with Lucien and Margot when a footman announced that Lady Catherine Ashford, Lord Ashford's daughter and one of the county's most influential young women, was in the drawing room requesting an audience with Elena. Lady Catherine? Elena exchanged confused glances with the others. We've never even met. Then this should be interesting, Lucien said. Shall we? Lady Catherine was standing by the window when they entered. She was beautiful in the sharp, intelligent way that reminded Elena of herself, if Elena had been raised with privilege instead of exile. Miss Whitlock, Lady Catherine said, turning to face them. Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unexpected. That's one word for it, Elena said carefully. What can I do for you, Lady Catherine? You can let me help you. Lady Catherine's expression was direct, no artifice. My father told me what's happening, about the trial, about Constance Whitlock's embezzlement, about everything, and I want to help. Why? Because I'm tired of women like Constance getting away with cruelty by hiding behind social respectability. Because my father speaks highly of you, and I trust his judgment. And because, she paused, because I think you're going to win, and I want to be on the winning side when the social landscape shifts. The honesty was refreshing. What kind of help are you offering? Lucien asked. Social support. I have influence among the younger women in the county. I can make sure they know the truth about what happened. I can counter the rumors Constance is spreading, and I can make it clear that supporting Elena Whitlock is the fashionable, correct thing to do. You're talking about turning me into a cause, Elena said slowly. I'm talking about turning you into a symbol, Lady Catherine corrected, of resistance, of women refusing to be erased, of truth winning over manipulation. It's good timing, actually. There's been a growing movement among educated women to push back against the idea that we should be silent and decorative. You're the perfect figurehead. Elena looked at Margot, who was smiling slightly, then at Lucien, who nodded. All right, Elena said. I accept your help, but on one condition. I won't be a figurehead. If I'm going to be a symbol, I want a voice in what that means. Lady Catherine's smile was sharp and approving. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's get to work. Over the next week, Lady Catherine proved as good as her word. She organized gatherings where Elena could tell her story directly to groups of influential women. She wrote articles for the county newsletter, detailing the evidence against Constance. She made it socially unacceptable to support Constance's version of events. The tide didn't just turn, it became a flood. By the time the magistrate's hearing arrived, public opinion had shifted completely. The courtroom was packed with people, not to condemn Elena, but to witness Constance's downfall. Elena sat in the front row, Luciman on one side, Margot on the other. Lord Ashford presented the evidence methodically, devastating in its thoroughness. Ledgers showing diverted funds, receipts for repairs never made, testimony from tenants and servants about Constance's cruelty. And then Margot took the stand. She was pale but steady as she swore her oath. The magistrate asked her to describe her mother's treatment of Elena. "My mother told me my entire life that Elena was dangerous," Margot said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "That she was mentally unstable and needed to be kept separate for everyone's safety. I believed her because she was my mother. I trusted her." "And when did you learn the truth?" the magistrate asked. "When I met my sister properly for the first time in 6 years. When I saw how she'd been living. When I realized that everything my mother had told me was a lie, designed to keep me obedient and isolated from anyone who might help me question her control." Constance sat at the defendant's table, her face expressionless. But Elena saw her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white. The magistrate reviewed the evidence, consulted with his advisors, and rendered his decision within an hour. "Constance Whitlock, you are hereby charged with embezzlement, fraud, and criminal neglect of fiduciary duty. You will stand trial in 3 weeks. Until then, you are remanded to house arrest with restricted movements. This hearing is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in conversation. Elena sat very still, letting the reality wash over her. It was real. It was actually happening. Justice was coming. Lucien squeezed her hand. "You did it." "We did it," Elena corrected. "All of us." Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. But this time, they weren't angry. They were cheering. Elena stepped out into the sunlight and saw dozens of faces turned toward her, not with suspicion or contempt, but with something that looked like respect, like recognition. Lady Catherine appeared beside her. "I told you, you're a symbol now." "I'm just Elena," Elena protested. "You're Elena Whitlock, who survived 6 years of exile and came back to demand justice. That's not just anything. That's extraordinary." As they made their way back to the carriage, people reached out to touch Elena's hand to offer words of support. It was overwhelming and strange, and nothing like the isolation she'd endured for so long. That evening, the household gathered for dinner in the formal dining room, the first time Elena had eaten there since her father's death. Lord Ashford, Lady Catherine, Lucien, Margot, and Elena herself, sitting at the head of the table in the chair that had once been her father's. "To Elena," Lord Ashford raised his glass, "for refusing to be erased, for fighting when fighting seemed impossible, for showing all of us what real courage looks like." "To Elena," the others echoed. Elena looked around the table at these people who'd chosen to stand beside her, who'd risked their own comfort and reputations to help her reclaim her life. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me when the world was trying to make me invisible, for believing me when it would have been easier to believe the lies, for fighting with me instead of for me. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "You shouldn't have had to," Margot said softly. "But I'm glad we're here now." Later that night, Elena stood on the balcony outside her room, looking out over the estate that was finally, legally, partially hers. The gardens her father had designed, the fields where tenants worked land they'd tended for generations, the cottage in the distance where she'd survived 6 years of exile. She should tear it down, probably, erase the evidence of that dark chapter. But looking at it now, Elena realized the cottage wasn't a symbol of her defeat. It was proof of her survival, a reminder that she'd endured the worst and came out stronger. She'd keep it standing, maybe turn it into something useful, a school, perhaps, or housing for families who needed it. Transform the site of her exile into something that helped others. Footsteps behind her announced Lucien's arrival. He joined her at the railing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Big day," he said. "Terrifying day." "You were magnificent. Again," Elena smiled. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." He turned to face her properly. "Elena, I know we agreed to a courtship, but I need you to know I'm not approaching this casually. I'm not looking for a pleasant distraction or a political alliance. When I look at you, I see the future I want. A partnership built on truth and respect and genuine connection. If that's not what you want, tell me now." I'll step back. But if there's even a chance you feel the same, Elena kissed him. It was impulsive and probably improper and absolutely perfect. He tasted like wine and possibility. When she pulled back, Lucian was staring at her with wonder. Was that an answer? He asked. Yes, Elena said. That was an answer. He smiled, a real smile, unguarded and full of joy, and kissed her again, properly this time. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his and whispered, I'm still terrified. Of what? That this is all a dream, that I'll wake up back in that cottage alone with none of this being real. It's real, Lucian promised, and even if it weren't, we'd make it real together. That's what partnerships do. They build reality out of hope and determination and shared vision. Elena believed him. For the first time in 6 years, she allowed herself to believe that happiness wasn't just possible, it was happening. The war wasn't over yet. Constance's trial still loomed. There would be more scandal, more difficulty, more battles to fight. But standing there with Lucian, knowing Margot was safe inside, knowing Lord Ashford and Lady Catherine and others were building something better, Elena finally understood what her father had tried to teach her all those years ago. Survival wasn't the goal. It was the foundation. The goal was thriving, building, creating something that lasted beyond the moment of crisis. And for the first time since her exile began, Elena was ready to do exactly that. The 3 weeks before Constance's trial passed in a strange blur of normalcy and tension. Elena spent her days learning to manage the estate alongside Lord Ashford, reacquainting herself with the business her father had built. She met with tenants, reviewed contracts, made decisions that actually mattered. At night, she and Lucian walked the gardens and talked about everything: philosophy, politics, their childhoods, their fears. He told her about growing up under the weight of ducal expectations, always performing, never quite certain who he was beneath the title. She told him about the Elena she'd been before exile and the one she'd become after, and how she was trying to figure out who she'd be next. Margot blossomed like a plant finally given sunlight. She started expressing opinions at dinner. She began reading the books Elena recommended. She even started challenging Lord Ashford's legal interpretations, which delighted him. Your sister is going to be formidable, Lucian observed one evening. She always was, Elena said. She just didn't know it yet. But beneath the progress, tension simmered. Constance remained in the West Wing, silent and isolated. The servants reported that she barely ate, barely slept, spent her days pacing and writing furiously in journals that she then burned. She's planning something, Margot said nervously. I know her. This silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. Elena feared Margot was right. The night before the trial, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood on her balcony watching the moon rise over the estate, thinking about her father, about how he'd loved her despite knowing she wasn't his by blood, about how he'd tried to protect her with legal provisions even after death. She wished he could see her now, see what she'd become, know that his faith in her hadn't been wasted. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Lucy? Yen standing there, fully dressed despite the late hour. Can't sleep either? She asked. I was thinking about tomorrow, about what happens after the trial. His expression was serious. Elena, regardless of the outcome, I want you to know something. I'm going to ask you to marry me. Elena's breath caught. You're telling me in advance? Yes. Because I don't want you to feel pressured by the moment or the circumstances. I want you to have time to think about it, to decide what you actually want, not what seems romantic or convenient. He stepped closer. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the scandal or the story. You. The woman who survived 6 years of exile with her brilliance intact. The woman who chose courage over safety. The woman who stands on balconies at midnight thinking too hard about everything. How did you know I was on the balcony? Because I know you. His smile was soft. So think about it. And when the trial is over, when the dust settles, I'll ask properly. And you can answer honestly, without the weight of everything else clouding your judgment. He kissed her forehead and left. Elena stood in her doorway, heart pounding, mind racing. Marriage to Lucian would mean becoming a duchess, moving to Valkyrie, taking on responsibilities she'd never imagined. But it would also mean partnership with someone who saw her, knew her, chose her anyway. She thought about it all night. The courthouse was even more packed for the trial than it had been for the hearing. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, others gathered outside hoping to hear the proceedings through open windows. Elena sat in the front row again, Lucien beside her, Margot on her other side. Lady Catherine sat directly behind them, a show of support that half the courtroom noticed. The judge entered. Lord Justice Pemberton, known for his fairness and his intolerance for corruption. He surveyed the packed courtroom with stern disapproval. "This is a court of law, not a theater," he announced. "Anyone who treats it otherwise will be removed. Are we clear?" The murmurs quieted. Constance was led in by court officers. She looked smaller than Elena remembered, diminished by weeks of house arrest and the weight of impending judgment. But her eyes, when they met Elena's across the courtroom, still held hatred. Pure, undiluted hatred. Elena held her gaze until Constance looked away. The prosecution presented first. Lord Ashford had hired the best barrister in the county, a sharp woman named Mrs. Blackwood, who had a reputation for destroying corrupt defendants. Mrs. Blackwood laid out the case methodically. The diverted funds, the falsified records, the systematic theft over 6 years. She called witnesses. The estate steward who'd been instructed to inflate maintenance costs, the banker who'd processed suspicious transactions, tenants who'd been promised repairs that never materialized. Each testimony built on the last, creating an undeniable picture of calculated embezzlement. Then Mrs. Blackwood called Elena to the stand. Elena's hands trembled as she took the oath. The courtroom felt suffocating, all those eyes on her waiting to see if she'd crack under pressure. "Miss Whitlock," Mrs. Blackwood began, her voice gentle but firm, "please tell the court about your living conditions for the past 6 years." Elena described the cottage, the cold, the isolation, the deliberately inadequate allowance. She kept her voice steady, factual, refusing to let emotion undermine her credibility. "And were you aware," Mrs. Blackwood asked, "that according to your father's will, you were entitled to half the estate's income during this period?" "No. Mrs. Whitlock never informed me of the codicil's existence." "What would that income have meant for your circumstances?" "It would have meant safety, comfort, the ability to live with dignity instead of barely surviving." Elena paused. "But more than that, it would have meant knowing my father hadn't forgotten me, that I still mattered to someone." She heard someone in the gallery sniffle. "Good. Let them feel the weight of what Constance had done." Constance's lawyer, a nervous young man who looked in over his head, tried to discredit Elena during cross-examination. "Isn't it true, Miss Whitlock, that you seduced the Duke of Valcari specifically to ruin your sister's engagement?" "No. But you admit you spent time alone with him before he arrived at the manor?" "I admit we had a conversation during a storm, that's all." "A conversation that led to him rejecting Lady Margot in front of the entire county elite?" "A conversation that led to him respecting Lady Margot's clearly stated desire not to marry a stranger. If you consider that seduction, you have a very strange definition of the word." Several people in the gallery laughed. The judge banged his gavel. "The witness will answer the questions without editorial comment." "Apologies, Your Honor," Elena said, not sounding sorry at all. The lawyer tried a different approach. "Your mother's letter suggests you have no legitimate claim to the Whitlock name. Doesn't that invalidate your father's provisions?" "The codicil explicitly names me as beneficiary regardless of parentage. My father knew the truth and chose to provide for me anyway. The law supports that choice." "But morally, Elena interrupted. "My father raised me as his daughter. He gave me his name, his education, his love. Blood doesn't determine family. Choice does. And he chose me." She looked directly at Constance as she said it, saw something crack in her stepmother's expression. When Elena left the stand, Margot squeezed her hand. "You were perfect," she whispered. Next came Margot's testimony. She walked to the stand with her head held high, and Elena felt a surge of pride. Mrs. Blackwood asked Margot to describe her relationship with her mother. "Controlling," Margot said simply. "Everything I did, wore, said, thought, it was all managed to serve her purposes. I wasn't a daughter. I was a chess piece in her social strategy." "Can you give an example?" "The engagement to Duke Valcari. I was never asked if I wanted to marry him. I was told it was happening, and my only role was to be beautiful and silent. When I tried to express fear or hesitation, my mother told me I was being childish and ungrateful. And how did your mother speak about Elena? She said Elena was dangerous, unbalanced, that she'd tried to sabotage our family and had to be kept away for everyone's safety. I believed her for years because she was my mother. Margot's voice strengthened. But it was all lies. Elena isn't dangerous, she's brave, and my mother isolated her because she was afraid Elena would expose her schemes. During cross-examination, Constance's lawyer made a fatal mistake. Lady Margot, isn't it possible you're simply young and easily influenced? That Miss Whitlock has manipulated you into testifying against your own mother? Margot's expression turned to ice. I'm 20 years old. I'm not a child. And the only person who's ever manipulated me is sitting at that table. She pointed directly at Constance. Elena gave me the truth. My mother gave me lies wrapped in control. I know the difference. The courtroom murmured approval. Even the judge looked impressed. Finally, Mrs. Blackwood called Lord Ashford. He provided the technical details, the exact amount stolen, the specific falsifications, the timeline of criminal activity. His testimony was devastating in its precision. When the prosecution rested, Constance's lawyer called only one witness, Constance herself. She took the stand with her chin raised, defiant despite everything. Her lawyer asked her to explain her actions. I was a widow, Constance said, her voice clear and carrying, left to manage a large estate with limited experience. Thomas's death was sudden. I had a young daughter to protect. I did what I thought was necessary to secure our future. And Miss Elena? Elena was troubled. Her mother's death affected her deeply. She became fixated on me, saw me as a replacement and then as a rival when I couldn't fulfill that role. It became clear that for everyone's safety, including her own, she needed distance from the main household. It was smoothly said, almost believable, if you ignored all the evidence. Mrs. Blackwood's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Whitlock, you say you managed the estate with limited experience, yet the records show you were sophisticated enough to create false ledgers, forge receipts, and establish shell creditors. That suggests considerable expertise. Constance's composure flickered. I had help. From whom? Financial advisors. Name them. Constance couldn't, because they didn't exist. Mrs. Blackwood pressed harder. You claim you provided for Elena, yet she lived in poverty while you spent lavishly on your own daughter's wardrobe, on social events, on personal luxuries. How do you reconcile that with your supposed concern for her welfare? I gave her what she needed. A crumbling cottage, an allowance that wouldn't feed a servant, 6 years of complete isolation? Mrs. Blackwood's voice rose. You didn't provide for her. You imprisoned her, and you profited from her erasure. I did what any mother would do to protect her child. Lady Margot just testified that your control damaged her, that she's terrified of you, that she's only now learning to make her own choices. Is that protection, or is it tyranny? Constance's mask finally shattered. She doesn't understand. Neither of them understand. I built everything, the social standing, the reputation, the future. And they want to destroy it because they're selfish and ungrateful and you stole from them, Mrs. Blackwood interrupted coldly. You stole Elena's inheritance. You stole Margot's autonomy. You stole from every tenant and servant and worker who depended on this estate being managed honestly. That's not protection. That's greed. Constance was shaking now, her composure completely gone. I deserve better than this. I sacrificed everything. You sacrificed nothing, Mrs. Blackwood said. You took everything, and now you'll face the consequences. The judge called for closing arguments. Mrs. Blackwood spoke passionately about justice, accountability, and the importance of protecting the vulnerable from those who abuse power. Constance's lawyer fumbled through a weak defense about widows' rights and difficult circumstances. Then the judge retired to consider his verdict. The wait felt endless. Elena sat frozen, Lucienne's hand gripping hers, Margot breathing shakily beside her. The courtroom buzzed with whispered speculation. After 2 hours, the judge returned. The room fell silent. "I have reviewed the evidence," Lord Justice Pemberton said, his voice grave, "and I find it overwhelming. Constance Whitlock, you are hereby found guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and criminal breach of fiduciary duty. You are sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, with all stolen assets to be returned to the estate immediately." The courtroom erupted, people cheering, gasping, talking over each other. Constance stood frozen at the defendant's table, her face ashen. Then she turned and looked directly at Elena. For a moment, Elena saw something flicker in her stepmother's eyes. Not just hatred, but something darker. Something final. Before anyone could react, Constance reached into her bodice and pulled out a small knife. Chaos exploded. People screaming, officers rushing forward. But Constance wasn't trying to attack anyone else. She pressed the blade to her own throat. "If I can't have the life I built," she said, her voice eerily calm, "then I'll end it on my own terms." "Mother, no!" Margot screamed. Elena moved without thinking. She pushed past the barrier, rushed toward Constance, her hands raised. "Don't. Please don't." Constance's hand trembled. "Why would you care? You should want me dead." "I don't want you dead. I want you to face what you've done. I want you to sit in that prison and think about the lives you destroyed." Elena's voice shook but held firm. "Dying now would be the easy way out." "And you've never done anything the hard way in your life." Something in Constance's expression crumbled. The knife dropped from her hand, clattering to the floor. She collapsed into the arms of the court officers, sobbing. They led her away. Not to prison yet, but to a medical facility where she could be evaluated and watched. The crowd dispersed slowly, people still processing the drama they'd witnessed. Elena stood in the middle of the courtroom, shaking. Lucien pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "It's finally over." But Elena wasn't sure. She'd stopped Constance from dying, but she couldn't stop the hollow feeling in her chest. Victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt exhausting. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings and estate business. Constance's assets were seized and returned to Elena's control. The stolen funds were recovered. New trustees were appointed to oversee the estate's management. Elena found herself suddenly, unexpectedly wealthy. Not just comfortable, but genuinely rich. "What will you do with it?" Lady Catherine asked during one of their meetings. Elena thought about the cottage, about 6 years of barely surviving, about all the people who'd suffered under Constance's mismanagement. "Rebuild," she said. "The tenant housing first, then the village infrastructure. I want to create something that lasts, not just for me, but for everyone who depends on this estate." "That's ambitious. I've spent 6 years with nothing but ambition keeping me alive. Might as well put it to good use." She also made another decision. She divided her inheritance, half for herself, half placed in trust for Margot. When Lord Ashford protested that it was too generous, Elena was firm. "Margot deserves her own resources, her own independence. I won't repeat Constance's mistake of controlling her through money." Margot cried when Elena told her. "You don't have to do this." "I know. I want to." Elena hugged her. "You stood beside me when you didn't have to. Let me stand beside you now." 2 weeks after the trial, Lucien asked Elena to take a walk with him through the gardens. It was evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elena began, "about marriage." Lucien stopped walking. "And? And I'm terrified of being a duchess, of living in a foreign country, of all of it." His face fell slightly. "So your answer is—" "My answer is yes." Lucien blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you, because I'm terrified, but I'm also certain. You see me, you know me, you stood beside me when the entire world was falling apart. That kind of partnership, that kind of love, is worth being terrified for." The smile that spread across Lucien's face was incandescent. He dropped to one knee right there in the garden path, pulled a ring from his pocket, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and asked properly, "Elena Whitlock, brilliant survivor, fiercest woman I've ever met. Will you marry me?" "I already said yes." "Say it again. I want to hear it twice." Elena laughed, a real laugh, full of joy instead of bitterness. "Yes. Absolutely yes."
He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her thoroughly, right there in the garden where anyone might see. Elena didn't care. Let them see. Let them talk. She was done hiding. The engagement announcement sent ripples through the county. A disgraced daughter marrying a duke after her stepmother's criminal conviction. It was the scandal of the decade. But this time the scandal worked in Elena's favor. Lady Catherine's campaign had been thorough. Elena wasn't seen as a social climber or manipulator. She was the brave woman who'd survived impossible odds and found love anyway. The wedding was planned for the following spring, giving Elena time to establish herself as a proper estate manager, and Lucien time to prepare his household in Valkyrie for a very different kind of duchess. But before any of that, there was one more thing Elena needed to do. She visited Constance in the medical facility where she was being held before transfer to prison. Constance looked shrunken, diminished. She sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. "Why are you here?" Constance asked without looking at Elena. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "Maybe to understand. Maybe to find closure. Maybe just to see if I feel anything other than emptiness when I look at you." "And do you?" Elena considered. "Pity? A little. You had everything. Wealth, status, a daughter who loved you, and you destroyed it all because you couldn't stop trying to control what you couldn't own. I was protecting what was mine. Margot was never yours. I was never your threat. You created enemies out of thin air because you needed someone to fight." Elena sat down across from Constance. "I survived 6 years of your cruelty. I'm going to build a good life despite everything you did, and you're going to sit in a cell knowing you failed to destroy me. That's my victory, and it's your punishment." Constance finally looked at her. "Do you hate me?" "I did. For a long time, hatred was all I had." Elena stood. "But I don't anymore. Hating you would mean you still had power over me. And you don't. Not anymore." She left without waiting for a response. Spring came with cherry blossoms and warm breezes and the kind of hope that felt earned instead of naive. The wedding took place in the estate's chapel. Small, intimate, nothing like the grand social spectacle Constance had planned for Margot. Elena wore a simple white gown with lace sleeves. Margot stood beside her as her maid of honor, beaming with pride. Lord Ashford walked her down the aisle since her father couldn't. And Lucien waited at the altar, looking at Elena like she was the only person in the world who mattered. The vows were traditional, but when Elena spoke them, she meant every word. Partnership, respect, love freely chosen instead of obligated. At the reception afterward, Lord Ashford gave a toast. "To Elena," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us all that survival isn't the same as surrender, who proved that truth, when defended fiercely enough, can overcome even the most entrenched cruelty, who transformed exile into opportunity and emerged not just intact but extraordinary." "To Elena," the crowd echoed. Elena looked around at the assembled guests, not the rigid aristocrats who'd attended Margot's failed engagement ball, but a different crowd, tenants whose homes she'd repaired, villagers whose lives she'd improved, women like Lady Catherine, who saw her as a symbol of resistance, and Margot, laughing at something one of Lord Ashford's cousins said, looking more alive than Elena had ever seen her. And Lucien beside her, his hand in hers, his future intertwined with hers by choice instead of arrangement. This was what winning looked like. Not revenge or destruction, but building something better from the ruins of what had been broken. Later that night, as she and Lucien prepared to leave for Valkyrie, Elena stood one last time on the balcony of her room. The room that had once been a guest chamber during her exile, then her bedroom during her recovery, and now a place she was leaving behind for something new. She looked out at the estate, at the cottage in the distance, which she'd converted into a school for tenant children, at the gardens her father had designed, at the life she'd rebuilt from nothing. "Ready?" Lucien asked from the doorway. Elena turned to him. "Ready?" They left together as dawn broke over the estate. The carriage rolled down the drive, past the gates where an angry mob had once gathered, toward a future Elena had never imagined possible. But as they traveled, Elena realized the truth that had sustained her through 6 years of exile and would sustain her through whatever came next. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore.
She wasn't the complication or the exile or the ghost at the edge of her own life. She was Elena Valkyrie, Duchess, partner, survivor, a woman who'd been cast out of her own family, who'd lived in poverty and isolation, who'd been told she was nothing and would never amount to anything. A woman who'd proven them all wrong, not by becoming what they wanted her to be, but by refusing to disappear, by fighting for truth when lies were easier, by choosing courage over comfort, over and over again, until courage became who she was instead of something she performed. The cottage grew smaller in the distance behind them. Elena didn't look back. There was nothing behind her now but proof that she'd survived. Everything ahead of her was possibility. And this time, when storms came, because they would, because life was full of storms, Elena wouldn't face them alone in a crumbling cottage, wondering if anyone would ever see her again. She'd face them with Lucien beside her, with Margot's fierce loyalty behind her, with the knowledge that she'd survived the worst and emerged not just intact, but stronger. The sun rose higher, painting the road ahead in gold. Elena smiled and took Lucien's hand. The forgotten daughter had become a duchess. But more importantly, she'd become herself. Brilliant, brave, and finally free.